Hello, everyone. So, as you know, we've been working in Latin American countries for USAID for, my goodness, like for 5 years, maybe. Someone there, 5, 6, maybe someone there, 5, 6 years. And it's a highly technical work. We basically use the probabilistic risk assessment to really identify the risk of those cities. And we try to communicate to non-technical people, you know, from government officials to the just common citizens to masons even, you know. So it's definitely the challenging kind of environment. And so this is something that even the US or anywhere, something we face is daily basis. How we can actually communicate effectively something very technical stuff to non-technical audience to make an action. So that's what actually today's talk's about. So yes, they're gonna have examples of their projects in Latin America, how they use the social media, how they actually use the report, how to go about them, you know. So, but this could be applicable for any offices or any conditions. That's what thing's about. So, Corey, you want to take it from here?
Yeah, I'm actually going to pass it off to Inés, who's our program assistant for the Prepare Pasto program in Colombia.
Hello to everyone. Yeah, as Corey said, my name is Inés Moreno. I am the program assistant. And today, Lucienne, Corey, Jaime, and I are going to be with you. We're going to tell you what we do in international programs and also what are we doing in Colombia. So please feel free to make any questions at the end of the presentation. Thank you. So I'm going to start talking about communicating and sharing information on seismic risk, risk management, and emergency response with non-technical people. So why communicate technical information with non-technical people? Well, nowadays, scientific, technical, and academic information with different degrees of complexity are continually generated due to studies, investigations, or industry and universities' routine developments. The users of this information are not necessarily people with the same background or ability to understand those who generate it. It also reaches users from different areas, levels, and professions. However, in very few cases, this information is made to be understood by the end user. So sharing this type of information does not mean that the end user must understand the technical concept in the same way as those who made it. Still, they can have a general idea that fits the initial concept so that the end user can do an appropriate use and obtain the best benefits from this information. Next, please. So regarding what I just said, this problem involves us and all social levels from the government, professionals, institutions, and the community. It is also related to the activities that we are currently doing under the Prepare program framework that corresponds to disaster risk management and reduction and emergency response, whose fundamental basis focus on knowledge and scientific information on hazards represented in natural phenomena that can generate disasters, including earthquakes, hurricanes, floods, among others. In this sense, this technical knowledge is made by a small but essential sector for all social levels. Thank you. So please, Corey, go ahead.
Thank you, Inés. And incidentally, that last photo was taken from a simulation. It was in October 2018. Sabine and I were visiting the program, and so the urban search and rescue team for Pasto conducted an earthquake simulation at that time. It's kind of cool. This is a picture of a tourist resort in Pasto, which is located, you know, in Colombia, in South America. We have a map on the next slide. If you would turn to that, please, Jaime. There it is. So Colombia, we've been working in Colombia since 2015 with USAID Bureau of Humanitarian Assistance funds. It's an extremely earthquake vulnerable part of the region. Most recently in 2018, there were back-to-back, actually there were a series of low magnitude earthquakes, 4 point something over a couple of weeks in Pasto. So we through our program manager, Jaime Eraso, and engineers from the municipality and other private sector partners, we were able to mobilize engineers to conduct rapid damage assessments. But that's part of the work that we're doing on a regular basis in Latin America, is strengthening capacity to respond to earthquakes. Next slide, please. So most of you are familiar with the PREPARE program. As I said, we've been managing these funds since 2015. It started in Costa Rica, and then we expanded to Colombia. We're now working in Mexico, El Salvador, Trinidad and Tobago as well. Of course, we still have our program in Haiti, and we have a program in Ecuador that's focused on training at the community level in seismic resistant construction techniques. So this is one of 6 programs that USAID and BHA support Miyamoto to implement. There have been multiple phases of the PREPARE program. The current phase in Pasto is actually the 3rd that we've implemented there, and we're about to receive new funding to work in the coffee growing region of central Colombia. That's 3 provinces and municipalities to implement basically the same model. Go ahead, Jaime. So the PREPARE program has had multiple goals over the years, depending on the particular phase of implementation. The original goal was to strengthen risk management policy and practice of national and municipal DRR institutions for a reduction in internally displaced people, lives lost, less people injured, and less economic disruption. And so that's done primarily by using a data-driven approach, working with our partners in the municipal governments, the national government agencies, ministries and such, and of course closely with engineering associations, universities, and other private sector partners. We generate seismic risk data, looking at the seismic hazard. Usually that's data that's already been produced by local institutions, but collecting that, organizing it, analyzing it, and then complementing it with additional exposure data, looking at the built environment, looking at building typologies, soil conditions, et cetera, to try to come up with some knowledge about the overall seismic risk facing these cities. I mean, these are, medium to large urban environments. In the case of Pasto, it's a secondary city. It's not the capital, but it is. It does have, I think 500,000 people. And as I said, it's in a very seismically vulnerable zone. So once we have that risk data and we analyze it using our software, run simulations, develop scenarios, and come up with a picture of what an earthquake might do in that particular city, from fatalities to people who are displaced, to injuries, to volume of debris. And then with that, try to make recommendations for how policymakers, urban planners, and others can reduce that risk through risk management, capacity building, and specific technical assistance activities. And that's what we then endeavor to do with them over the rest of the program. Go ahead, Jaime. So we have the Colombia or the Pasto risk assessment that was done in 2016. And we used the outcomes from that assessment to inform several other technical activities and deliverables. Go ahead. There's one of the priorities of the municipality after the assessment was published was to look at how they could support engineers, urban search and rescue teams and other first responders to conduct rapid damage assessments after an earthquake. So looking at damages caused by an earthquake. This is something obviously that first responders are especially interested in. They want to be able to know what a damaged or collapsed building looks like and how it could affect their search and rescue operations. So we help them develop a checklist or a tool, all kinds of supporting guidance around that, an operations manual, a training manual, a field manual for surveyors. And then, of course, these were all actually adopted and formally included in the emergency response protocols of the municipal government. Another part of our technical assistance work was and continues to be under the current phase in conducting vulnerability assessments of key buildings, mostly entirely actually municipal buildings, so these are public. In 2017, one was a hospital. We're looking at other municipal buildings that have a response function, so it could be the fire station where the urban search and rescue team is located, or other emergency operations centers. And then a debris management strategy that was from the second phase of the program in 2018, 2019. The idea again, earthquake is going to create a certain volume of debris. Municipal responders need to know how to clear that debris, where to dispose it, and how to treat it if possible. So there was a whole strategic framework developed around that. Most recently, we helped with development of a site selection methodology, looking at the specific criteria, environmental impact, and things like that, so that they'll have pre-identified sites where they can dispose debris after an earthquake. And then finally, a response assistance strategy after an earthquake. So the 2018 earthquakes that I mentioned earlier, unfortunately, the national and municipal response to those earthquakes was not adequate. There were still quite a few gaps in the system. And so one of the things we're doing with the current phase is to work with local universities and, of course, the disaster response risk reduction unit of the municipality to see how we can better align private sector experts, engineers, and others with the municipality and make sure that whatever technical assistance is provided to affected communities after an earthquake is following best practice and includes all the relevant methodologies and tools for that sort of work. So then next slide, please, Jaime. The final aspect of our work in Prepare is working with urban search and rescue and other first responders. We've done that through training, other forms of capacity building, procurement, but it's really important that these units, which are oftentimes the very first to arrive on the scene after a disaster, they know how to work with local communities. So in the current phase of the program, and Jaime will speak more to this, we're actually using urban search and rescue as kind of a liaison to these most remote and vulnerable communities to communicate risk as we understand it from the risk assessment in a way that's understandable to non-technical audiences. So people who don't have high education levels, maybe not even literate, nonetheless need to understand the importance of what we learned from this risk assessment. And so we're working with urban search and rescue teams to help communicate that in a way that makes sense to everyone. So that's the last slide that I'll present, and I'll pass it on to Jaime Eraso, who is our National Program Manager for Prepare in Colombia.
Okay. Thank you, Corey. So continuing with the result of the Prepare program, some question now is, who is this information for, to who is this seismic information generated by the program useful? And who have we worked with during the program, right? So this information is useful first for the government, that is the authorities, the decision maker. It is useful for research on these topics in universities. It is useful for urban search and rescue groups, yeah, and of course for engineers, right? And authorities or decision makers can use this information to create or improve their plans, creating new policies, regulation, guidelines, and also for including budgets, right? The universities, as I mentioned, for research in improving knowledge, the user groups to generate or create protocols, procedures, and also strengthening their practices, right? And engineers for earthquake resistant building codes, best practices, improve building designs, etc. Of course, these are only some of the possible applications of this information. So, okay, at this point, we face a challenge trying to communicate this information, as Keith mentioned earlier. We need to communicate, right, this information, this technical knowledge produced in this case by the prepared program to user or non-technical people. So the question here is how to communicate in a properly way this technical information to non-technical people so that its application is truly effective. Here, I want to show you what is the problem that usually occurs. On the left side, you see the generators of the knowledge or information, the technical staff, scientifics, engineer, geologists, etc. And on the right side are the users of this information, such as technicians, engineers, for example, but who don't know or don't manage well these topics, right? There are also non-technical people like mayors, decision makers, rescue teams members, even people from the community who need this information. So what usually happens when the technical group wants or needs to share this technical information? This information is usually so complex, or apparently so complex, that for a non-technical user, it is something like a hieroglyph, so it is not understood. Now, in the other sense, when authorities, health personnel, for example, rescue team staff, or the community try to share or express their needs, often the technical group cannot interpret it adequately, right? So what is one of the best ways to fix that problem? That is working as a team, working together from the beginning whenever possible. But an important point here is that the objective of properly communicating technical information to non-technical people is not only soften, let's say, the terms, right? The idea is not only to change, for example, the word earthquake for shaking, or the word hazard for danger, or something like that, but also to translate a complex concept into something understandable but correct, without losing the sense of the concept itself. Knowing how to do it, not only know what words to use, right? But also what media to use, for example, and that is not easy. So how have we addressed this Prepare Pasto? So what do? We work together with the authorities and decision makers from the beginning. We explain them in the simplest possible way by technically correct what we are looking for, the why of this, the reasons, and how we were going to do it. In this way, in addition to motivating, we started a communication work so that our efforts and the subsequent results could be used correctly by them, right? In this sense, we provided trainings on different topics. We facilitated discussions, and we formed working groups with them. Also, we worked with local partner universities, providing also trainings, seminars, forums, workshops to explain and share basic concepts such as, for example, how earthquakes are generated, what is seismic hazard, vulnerability, risk management, or response to emergencies, among other things, right? We also work in the same sense with the rescue groups, firefighters, the civil defense, and the Red Cross. Since they have a different preparation and mission, it was necessary to work in a different way, with a different approach, let's say. Likewise, with these groups, we provide training, seminars, workshops to transmit the same basic concepts of hazard, vulnerability, risk management, etc. Now, another important thing is, if our goal, in addition to strengthening knowledge about risk, the capacity of authorities and the response to disaster, is to mitigate the risk by reducing vulnerability, an important element is missing in this equation, right? I mean, if we are working with authorities, with universities, with rescue teams, with engineers, to solve the above question, it is necessary to introduce another important actor, right? So this important actor is the community. And why share information with the community? Why it is important to communicate information on these topics, on seismic risk, on risk management, or preparedness for emergencies and disaster with the community. Yeah, this is important because in our environment, in Colombia and in general in Latin America and the Caribbean, especially in the poorest areas, self-construction is very common. Yeah, I mean, in that areas, many houses are built by their own owners, and usually without an adequate earthquake-resistant techniques, right? Or adequate materials. This, of course, generates a very high vulnerability. I mean, a low capacity of this housing to adequately support an earthquake. Seismic vulnerability is one of the biggest problems in these regions. So it's very important that these people know what is the level of hazard and risk where they live. And also why build in that way makes them so vulnerable to earthquakes. In addition, to know how to prepare for an emergency or who to turn to in the event of a disaster, or who is the authority that would help them in those cases, right? That is essential. And in other words, you know very well that the lack of preparation and the lack of information is the greatest vulnerability. So people will act in a positive way if they know what to do, if they know that what they know will work, and if they know who to turn to or who is going to support or assist them in an emergency or a disaster, right? But this work with the community is much more complex than working or communicating information through authorities or response groups. I mean, a single group, right? And why? Because the community is made up of different sectors. You know, there are children, young people, adults with training, and adults without training or preparation, people who work in or have different occupations, and of course, it is also made of elderly people. And therefore, it is necessary to use different methodologies or approaches, right? So what are we doing in PASO with the community to try to address and solve this problem and to be able to communicate this information, I mean the technical information that we generate? So this phase of the program with the experience and lessons learned in the first phase, we have a structured work plan to communicate this kind of information. This work plan is being developed with experts working with the community and experts in pedagogy, as well as technical entities and the city authorities. So first, we began here with a diagnosis of the conditions and characteristics of the community in both composition, age, gender, etc., as well as the level of knowledge. Then we generate a baseline. Next, we develop a strategy to identify and select social leaders to serve as liaison with their community. They are persons that truly represent their community. Together with a representative of municipal entities and these selected leaders, we create a working group that we call the Community Knowledge Committee, right? These leaders, were trained in different basic topics in order to have an appropriate context, so that this link and collaboration with the community is really effective, right? Likewise, an entire information communication plan and strategy was generated with different methodologies, which is the next step here in this cycle. Once these methodologies have been implemented, the idea is to carry out a diagnosis again to evaluate the impact and, if necessary, improve the process, right? The plans and methodologies has been worked together with the authorities and the community so that they are implemented not just once, but periodically and are sustainable, right? Here is the Community Knowledge Committee, as I mentioned, made up of the Colombian Geological Survey, the Pastor Risk Reduction Office, firefighters, community leaders, led by Miyamoto. And here we have the first training on different topics for the selected community leaders with the experts in the community works. In this sense, we have also developed several consultation tools such as surveys, additional diagnosis, in order to collect information that allows us to know what are the preferences of the people to receive information. I mean, what type of social networks they use the most, for example, if they use radio, television, in what type of topic they are most interested, what time they use social networks the most and more, and among other things. These tools, this information analysis, the results are very important for the development of the materials and the media with which we want to share or communicate the information. So within this communication process for the design of these materials, the first step was the definition of the content of the topic and the messages that we want to communicate. For this, we generate content matrices with concepts of, for example, what is an airwave, what is hazard, risk, etc., which were translated, let's say, by communication experts, so that these messages are understood by the community. They were then validated so that they are correct. Next, the pedagogical perspective was incorporated, right, using different methodologies and experiences. Then the technical requirements were validated, and the design of the materials began based on the above. Right now in PASTA, we are in the pre-production phase. And after this, and before dissemination of this material and information, a validation of the materials already created must be done again. I mean, this material should be technically correct. So among the communication materials to be created are graphic material for social network, videos and animations, for commercials, printed booklets for distributions, scripts with key messages for radio and other scenarios, such as for teachers, for example, waiting rooms and similar spaces, and jingles for commercials. And due to the pandemic, we had to change some plans, among which are interaction with people due to restriction, right? So we are generating pedagogical plans and sessions plans where the methodologies on how to share properly this information and this material are contained in detail, especially those materials that need interaction with people, I mean, face-to-face. These plans will be implemented with, by the authorities when these conditions improve, right? So what's next? Well, once the design of the materials has been complete, it is necessary its implementation and dissemination to the community, and also the implementation of the plans and strategies that I have mentioned. Okay, there is a special issue that we want to address within this component of work with the community. In the immediate aftermath of a disaster, you know, due to the size of the emergency, rescue teams are usually unable to immediately reach the scene of the disaster. This is due to the fact that there are not enough personnel to attend to all incidents at the same time, right? There is no immediate information on all isolated cases. In a seismic disaster scenario, for example, there will be hundreds of building collapses, fires, trapped people, the access roads will be blocked, among other problems. So the first to go before the rescue groups, the first responders in these disasters are usually the people, right? The neighbors, the community. They try to do their best to rescue trapped people, for example, but they don't have the knowledge or skills to do this properly, right? And therefore, instead of helping, they often make the incident condition worse. And once the rescue teams arrive, people want to continue collaborating, but as they don't know how to properly interact with this specialized group, they usually become an obstacle, right? So one of our goals is to work together with the rescue groups of Pasto in Colombia, the USAR teams, so that once the community has received the information in the first stage on seismic risk and emergency response, when the community is motivated and knows better the rescue groups and the authorities, then we will train, the USAR teams will train a smaller group of the community made up of volunteers who are willing to help in emergencies and collaborate with authorities and user groups and train them as first responders. This, of course, is a kind of communication of technical information with no technical people, right? Okay, so to finish this part and as a final comments for this part, I just want to mention that sharing technical information, in this case, seismic risk information, in an appropriate way to non-technical people allows apply more effectively knowledge, tools, the results, among other things. This allows promoting research, and the advancement and improvement of the knowledge, right? And in addition, something very important, this promotes and facilitates the reduction of vulnerability and therefore, of course, of risk. This, of course, improve, as I have already mentioned, the response to emergencies. Also, of course, many other points, but I just wanted to mention a few. So, okay, I'll give the floor to Lucienne, who is going to tell us about some international application of this topic. So, Lucienne, please go ahead.
Thank you, Jaime. Hi, everyone. I'm Lucienne. I just wanted to talk briefly to conclude about a few ways that we're applying this sort of approach and strategy to other locations and other sorts of audiences. So 2 examples here of how we're applying this risk communication strategy to business leaders. Our project in Trinidad and Tobago, which is also under the Prepare umbrella program. One of the aspects of the project is working directly with the American Chamber of Commerce in Trinidad, as well as some other private sector networks and specific businesses on private sector preparedness, for example, coming up with guidelines and fact sheets and information on practical ways that they can prepare for hurricanes and other events. This is things like understanding where floodwater might enter their building, figuring out if they have redundant sources of power, and other ways to understand their physical and structural risk as a company and what that would mean for their business in the long after a disaster. Another example is a project that was just launched in Indonesia with under the management of our principal, Elizabeth Pethio. And this is, again, working with the U.S. Agency for International Development and doing a similar risk study, but this one will be focusing on private sector business assets, their buildings, and helping to coordinate between disaster management agencies and the private sector, who often have to work together after a disaster, but before disasters aren't always kind of coordinated and in communication. So using tools, using the risk study to develop continuity plans and ways that the businesses can both understand their structural risks, as well as sort of apply that knowledge to plans and tools that will help them be more resilient. Jaime, you can go to the next slide. Some other examples of how we're applying this approach to professionals, architects, and engineering and construction professionals. In Bangladesh, we're working in the capital city of Dhaka to increase building code compliance. It's such a large city and there's a lot of unregulated development and construction that even a small disaster in one building can have a huge impact due to how many people are living in each building and the population density. In DACA, we're working with a range of audiences, so that includes architectural associations, associations of engineering students, but we're also working with the general public and community members. So we have to figure out ways to sort of tailor our messages to different audiences. For an architect, when we talk about building codes, they likely are familiar with what a building code is, whereas someone from the community, a tenant maybe who we hope would talk to their landlord about compliance, might not even know what a building code is. So we have to find ways to tailor our message to the different audience, and hopefully creating resilience throughout the city at multiple different levels. So that on the left is an example of a communication graphic that we're distributing on social media. And then finally, in Ecuador, Corey mentioned this briefly at the beginning of the presentation, but we are working on seismic resistant construction practices. So we're doing extensive training with professional, semi-professional, and untrained construction workers, as well as homeowners, and different techniques that they can use. So that's sort of taking the technical information, creating manuals, creating workbooks and sessions where they're learning about disaster resilience, but also doing hands-on activities with brick, with masonry, as well as some really exciting work with bamboo on simple practices that they can use in their jobs if they're construction workers, or just if they're a homeowner. As Jaime mentioned, a lot of people are constructing their own homes, or if they're hiring someone to do it, then they might be able to have a little bit of oversight and know what to ask for and know what to look for to make sure that their home is being built in a resilient and seismic resistant way. So those are just some examples of the way that we apply these theories to different audiences and different projects, and different types of work that we're doing around the region and internationally. That is it for me. I think it's back to Corey.
Great, thanks Jaime, thanks Lucienne. So this is where we finish the presentation and open it up to questions and comments. Welcome to use the chat feature or just blurt out your questions if you have any. I want to just open it up. I'll also just reiterate what Kit said earlier in the presentation at the beginning, that, well, you know, perhaps some of what we've presented here isn't directly applicable to maybe the engineering work that we're doing in the United States or other offices around the world in terms of, you know, our work at the community level in Pasto. I think in general, this really is very, very relevant. How do we communicate risk in particular, or more generally, technical information to a non-technical audience? So, you know, we hope that this has been useful for you all. So yeah, any questions or comments? Okay, Mr. DK, to everyone, any community work other than South America? Community work, not to that degree. Ecuador has been really, I would say, the major, and Colombia now, Ecuador and Colombia, the two countries where we've implemented this approach on a more extensive basis. I think we're looking, I know we're looking at the new award that will be coming on in Mexico next month. Guadalajara, Mexico, it's the second biggest city outside of Mexico City. We'll have an objective that's focused specifically on training of vulnerable community members on the outskirts of the city center, where Kit was there about a year ago. I don't know if he's still on the call, he can speak to this. And he spoke with local builders and observed really, really poor substandard construction norms in the buildings there. And so felt that that would be a perfect opportunity to try this approach in other parts of Latin America. So that'll be starting up in October, and hope to be able to report back on some success there as well. Of our recommendations in Bangladesh in development or implementation phase. Lucienne, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, sure. I'm not quite sure which recommendations they're referring to, but the project is in implementation phase now. It's been a little bit slowed down because of COVID, obviously. And what's happening now is that the city government is developing what they're calling an urban resilience unit within the city government that's going to be in charge of permitting and building code compliance. So that's a completely new department in their government. And so the communication side of that is helping them to set up, their website, their page, hiring people and doing some of their outreach and campaigning. But there's also other technical components of the project that are also in implementation to provide support and oversight. I believe they're moving the permitting process online as well. So all of that is in implementation.
Great. There's another comment here from Miyamoto Haiti to everyone. Miyamoto Haiti worked with communities, training women, children, masons, teaching them bad constructions and why and how to do better. Also material.
I think that was, Corey, I think that's a comment to say that it's not only South America where we're doing community work, but also in the Caribbean, specifically in Haiti, we've done a lot of community work as well.
Okay, great. Thanks for that clarification. Okay, Miyamoto has been invited to a conference at the Catholic University focused on knowledge transfer and seismic resilience. Could we use this material in the conference? Juan, thank you for your question. I can't see any reason that we shouldn't use this material in the conference. I would suggest that you speak with Jaime. He was the primary architect of this presentation. I don't know if there's anything in the presentation that would be considered proprietary or not something we'd want to share, but I don't know. Lucienne, do you have any thoughts on that? I can't.
No, yeah, I think as long as Jaime is okay with it, I think it'd be great to share.
I wanted to ask Jaime for a quick clarification on the Meguri-Maki method that you mentioned briefly in one of your slides. I know that this is something that Sabine was introduced to by, I believe, a faculty member at the Tokyo University where she's been studying, and it has to do with this idea of disaster imagination, how to communicate risk to non-technical audiences, helping people to visualize a disaster. And I know that's something that we've been trying to roll out at some level in the PASTO program. I'm wondering if Jaime, you could speak briefly about that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, the idea with that methodology, as you mentioned, it was developed, if I'm not wrong, in Japan. And the idea is that the audience, the people, the non-technical people, imagine a disaster, right? Not all the people has faced a disaster, not everybody have experienced a disaster, right? So this methodology look for that. The people imagine a disaster scenario and create different kind of things, like, for example, what they have to do, they can to do when an emergency occurs. As far as I know, we need to adapt that methodology to the local conditions here, because the original methodology was oriented or aimed to health personnel for hospital and things like that. But we want to implement it here for children, for youngest people, and also for other ages, adults and things like that. So really that is the idea. I'm not so well familiar with the methodology, honestly.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you, Jaime. It's still quite, I think, in its early stages, but something that I'm sure we'll be implementing more if we have success with it in Pasto. So Viri from Zapopan asked if we can send the presentation after this, and absolutely, we'll send it out. Probably Zach will help with that later in the week. Let's see, from Maddie, is risk communication affected by the donor politically? I.e., let's say the US government can't make up its mind on whether climate change is happening. Does that affect the ability of USAID to communicate risks? That's a good question. I would say from my professional experience that is something that could be affected by the politics of the donor in this case. We've certainly seen other programs, thinking about, for example, HIV/AIDS under certain administrations where there's objection to kinds of intervention. I think in the case of climate change, if the government is not interested in promoting that or promoting methods to respond to climate change, then that would certainly have an impact on the ability of implementing partners to communicate associated risks from climate change. So I think it's an interesting question. My guess is yes, but I'm not. I'm certainly not an expert on that sort of a thing.
I would agree. In my experience, it has impacted what is or is not allowed to be communicated. So, in response to the question, I would say that yes, it does. It does impact it sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. All right, we have a few more minutes if there's any other questions. And if not, I just want to really thank everyone for joining the presentation. Hope it's been useful to you. If there's anything after the presentation, if you'd like to speak with any of us further about this, by all means, reach out to me. I'm happy to facilitate that, and look forward to the next MAG 10 presentation.